This story comes from my uncle. One day while chatting with a friend, they made a shocking discovery. They had both encountered the same terrifying creature years ago. When my uncle was young, he worked as a shepherd, tending sheep in the mountains near his village. His job required him to stay with the flock from noon until morning, often spending the night alone in the wilderness. One evening, my uncle fell asleep while watching over the sheep. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, he woke up and saw something that made his blood run cold. Standing before him was a creature unlike anything he had ever seen. It had the head of a goat, but the body of a human. It was completely unclothed, and instead of feet, it had hooves. At first, my uncle thought he was dreaming, but the creature didn't disappear. It walked on two legs, just like a person, and stared at him with piercing eyes. Terrified, my uncle grabbed his shotgun and fired multiple shots. Instead of running in fear, the creature simply turned and walked away into the darkness. Years later, while sharing this story with a friend, my uncle was stunned by his friend's reaction. His friend had seen the same creature. He described an identical experience. He had fallen asleep while tending his sheep and woke up to find the goat-headed being standing nearby. But unlike my uncle's encounter, the creature didn't approach him. Instead, it spoke in a strange, inhuman language before vanishing into the night. Both men described the creature the same way, from its eerie, goat-like eyes to its unnatural mouth and tongue. They were certain it wasn't just their imagination. They had seen something real, something neither of them could explain. The doppelgangers. This happened when I was 10 years old, living in the Philippines. My grandmother Yolina owned a farm with many animals. At the time, I had 4 cousins, Pablo, Teras, Alejandro, and Josephine. Each of us had chores. I took care of the chickens and cows in the barn, while my cousins looked after the sheep, cattle, and dogs. My grandmother tended to the fruits and vegetables. The first strange event happened to Alejandro when he was 9. One night, our grandmother asked him to fetch some beets from the garden. He left at around 9:00 p.m., but didn't return until nearly an hour and a half later. When he finally came back, he was empty-handed. "Where are the beets?" grandmother asked. Alejandro looked at her confused. "What beets?" he said. "I never went to the garden. I only went to the outdoor bathroom and came right back." He swore he had never heard her request. Instead, he said he had spent the past hour playing outside with our 2 dogs, Lovely and Jean. So if Alejandro never left, who did? The next incident happened to Teras. Around 7:00 p.m., she went outside to feed the dogs. Half an hour later, she returned, but something felt off. She usually brought the empty food container back, but this time, she didn't have it. Grandmother also noticed something else. Laughter coming from Teras's room. She went to check. "Why did you just come inside?" she asked. But Teras looked confused. "Grandmother, I haven't left my room since 6:00 p.m. Grandmother thought she was lying and scolded her. But if Teras had been in her room the whole time, then who had she seen outside? Then it happened to Pablo. That day he had stayed in his room and never came out. Grandmother left food outside his door, and every time she checked, the plate was empty. She assumed he was inside, eating. But at around 5 p.m., Pablo walked in through the front door. "Hello, I just got back from the fields," he said, holding a bundle of wheat, carrots, and potatoes. It took me a while to gather these. We all stared at him in shock. Grandmother rushed to his room and flung the door open. It was empty. So if Pablo had been out all day, who had been eating the food in his room? After these terrifying incidents, grandmother made a decision. "We're moving," she said. Before we left, we asked the neighbors if they knew anything about the house's past. Their response sent chills down our spines. They told us that years ago, many people had hanged themselves from a large tree that once stood on that land. before our house was built. The previous owners had also reported seeing strange things, doppelgangers. That's when we realized the truth. The family members we had seen weren't really us. Short,